and we are here with the official nutritionist and alchemist of the Biohacker Summit, Jarkko Halmetoja. I was passing by when you did your speech, and I saw on the screen you had the Philosopher's Stone and the Elixir of Life. What on earth was that?
Yeah, I was thinking if the theme is longevity, that's basically been the archetypical idea forever. So I played around with the idea of using this old alchemical process for making actually an elixir or smoothie or blended drink or whatever. And it was super fun. But yeah, we went through a lot of different ingredients, and the topic was botanicals for longevity. So a lot of plant materials, few fungi, and we had a good drink.
So nutrition is obviously a huge part of living a healthy, happy life. What would you say is your main message in 2022?
I think my core thesis has been that if people get more connected to the food, doesn't matter what are the ways, but that's when you actually start to move the idea of nutrition from your head more to your heart, and then it becomes, there's less friction with the whole concept, because that's, of course, for many people, a huge source of stress also. What do I eat? It's all in here. But when you are more connected to certain things, let's say you're growing tomatoes in your backyard, it feels very different, the whole process. So I still encourage people to really get into connection, whether it was through hunting, whatever. People can choose their ways, but that's even more important these days, of course, with the food. The whole logistical chains are broken down, and we don't necessarily will have all of these goodies in the future in the same way. So for the food safety, in a sense, also very important concept.
It's almost like you're talking about food like it's alive, and listening to your heart, as in not just looking at the textbook and saying, okay, what am I supposed to eat? But more like asking your body, like, what does my body need? And then going with that.
Yeah, that was a key teaching of Stephen Harrod Buhner, who's this really brilliant writer, but a masterful herbal guy. And he had a whole book about kind of using your heart as a sensing organism, and we know that it has neurons and it has intelligence, but I'm not even that into the metaphysical side of things, but just much more about that. I think the food is best for you when you don't have to think about it. It's much more like you're focusing on the social aspects and the sensory inputs and everything else, rather than how many milligrams of magnesium you're getting. So in that sense, I think just like even physiologically, it's much more better route when you're more connected to the sensory input rather than just the cognitive process.
I mean, we know also from HeartMath that your heart is like electrically giving off more electricity than your brain. Yeah. So I've even heard of people like lifting the supplements in front of their heart before like taking them, which is interesting.
And in Finnish we have this word makustella. So we are using in our language a lot of wider spectrum of sensory inputs to basically emphasize how we're making decisions, what affects our end results, and yeah, it can be your heart, it can be your mouth, your feeling. People are different in that sense, but it's a good point.
And Finland culturally had very much like shamanism and from the land, and we have 75% forest here, and so it makes sense that that's a big part of like what we eat as well.
True that.
Yeah. So if people who don't really know where to begin with this journey of biohacking and specifically the nutritional part, what would you say is like some key ingredients that should be or could be included in a daily diet for longevity?
Well, I think some of the most safe bets would be probably berries. I think that's one of the categories that, whether it was like carnivore people or vegans or whatever, all the sides of the coin, I think berries are pretty safe, pretty low in sugar, especially like wild berries that are not hyper sweet, like, cultivated strawberries or whatever. That's definitely a big category that has so many goodies, can be used in so many ways, that's definitely some of the ideas that we should use more by volume of those types of things. Can be also berry powders, whatever, but that's what pops first into my head from all of the things. Like, well, this is something that everybody kind of agrees, like, these are really good stuff.
So your elixir of life needs to have some berries.
Yes, some berries, definitely.
And it doesn't matter like what kind of berries, because obviously like berries that grow in Asia or South America are different than what we have in the Nordics.
Then we can boil it down. Then every system they have like this one really high vitamin C berry, whether it was camu berry in the Amazon or in Australia, they have this kakadu blum, or it was amlaki in India, or here we have a rose hip. So that's definitely one key concept in every herbal system or nutritional system, have some high vitamin C berry, because it's not just the vitamin C, but it has the acidity, it has certain aspects that affect all the other things that you're eating. But that's a key concept. Other than that, I can't really say, because it's again like very dualistic idea that are the bilberries better than the lingonberries, but they are just affecting a little different systems in your body, and then it boils down on what are your needs. Are you just working on a computer and I want to support your eye health, or are you, athlete and want to support your muscular system? So, but yeah, especially wild berries that are less sugary and really high in nutrients.
And I think that's a theme in the Biohacker Handbook that you have authored as well with your colleagues, was that you need to eat for what you do rather than anything else. Like, it's not a pyramid of food, but rather if you're doing more computer work, you need things for your eyes. And, if you're an athlete, you need something else. Would you say that also applies to like where you are geographically? Like if you're in a certain part of the world, you naturally need something else?
Yeah, definitely. And of course, the hard part is also the fact that we've been, changing seeds, and the plants that may grow in your backyard are not necessarily native into that environment. So we often think that, well, we're eating potatoes here in Finland, but we've been doing that for just a few hundred years. It's not like an old thing in this climate. It's quite new. So in that sense, you also need to understand the history of the foods that are around you. But definitely just the fact that you're eating something, let's say, from your immediate ecosystem, just the bacterial side of things. On top of every like wild green, there is this biome of probiotics, and it literally connects you with the culture, the bacterial culture inside of you. And that's shown to, for example, regulate your temperature better when you're eating stuff from your local environment. So yeah, definitely a huge fan of that. But it's not that black and white like with many things, because of the genetics have changed around the world so much.
Sure. Back to the berries for a second. Does it make a difference if you eat them fresh or frozen? Like, what's the nutritional value of that?
Yeah, there is a little bit of difference, but not that much that I would mind too much out of it. Let's say if you have frozen bilberries, probably there's like 10% less of some of the goodies. And one of the cool things is to understand that when you basically let the frozen berries on your, fridge or on the table to cool down or to warm up, that basically breaks some of the structures of the compounds in them, and then you'll actually lose quite a bit. So I'd recommend either use them, frozen, or use them fresh instead of just, melting them in a room temperature. But
interesting.
That's not a big thing. Fresh, always best. Frozen goes a long way. Berry powders, they're all good.
Do you mean like eat them cold or frozen is better than
Yeah, if you think just nutritionally, but of course I use always the frozen berries or most of the time for the smoothies and the blender, so it's not like you get the ice pick
yes
in your forehead. But
that's something I've actually learned here at the Biohacker Summit, like the value of frozen things, because there's a lot of people who are super busy and don't have time, or buy the fresh stuff and then don't get around to eating it, so it goes bad, and then it's sort of this vicious cycle. So that is a totally valid option to
it is, and
use
especially
things.
if you think about like if you're picking berries in the forest, to your basket, and then it might take a few hours when you're back to your car or whatever. And but in the more commercial side of things, they are getting them into the cooler right away.
Okay.
So in that sense, there is also a lot of benefits in protecting the compounds because the process is so optimized. So in that sense, I'm not against frozen stuff at all.
Yeah, and more than anything, I think, like you've alluded to it, but it's like if you love what you eat and you're really present with it and you value it and you know where it came from and stuff, that just also makes it excellent for your body, like adds a whole new dimension.
It is, and I think that's from the alchemical side of things, almost like you need to go through certain processes. For me, I was really into details and that mental thing and all that, and I think I've grown a little bit with that, and that's why I want to share that, because many people are still so much in their mind and in the details and all that, and it's really valuable to have a sharp mind, but then you also need to feel things and have this more holistic, I hate that word, but more holistic point of view on things. And that's why I think they're just kind of phases where you teach yourself by basically making your mind to believe certain things, and then you start to understand it more. It's like in sports. Yeah, you can read all the science and all the things, but it's much more of an art form. Listen to your body, do certain things, and I think food should be much more like that, and it's one of those things that's the furthest away from it. It's so much into like how many milligrams of curcumin and this and that, and so yeah, more heart to that.
That makes a lot of sense, though, because like our brains are not like back in the old day science. We used to think the brain was the central processing unit. Now we know that the gut actually has its own intelligence and the heart has its own intelligence. So it makes perfect sense that you would use all those senses, because even if you have the milligrams right, if you're stressed out, it's not gonna even digest properly. So that makes a lot of sense.
But that kind of comes in a way. Comes on your way. If you think about like flow experiences in athletics, having sex, whatever, you don't want to be thinking about stuff. It's much more just getting that stuff away and then enjoying the process. And that's why I think that, you need to learn certain things, but then you need to make it more of a practice. Like, I don't feel it's very good to say like yoga is a sports or whatever. It's a practice. It's more. So I feel about food in that way.
That seems to be a theme at the Biohacker Summit. Like we've got artwork all over this time, and it's more like the enjoyment of life, like the art, like moving away, like taking the technology and the new things that we have, but actually enjoying them more and sort of making like your food is your art in a way. It's part of your song and dance of this life experience. So
what are you feeling like right now? And that's a good guideline for all the optimization things, like, do you feel good right now? And I think those aspects of social things, and all, that's a good kind of litmus test for yourself. Like, are you actually getting your real goals, or are you caught up in certain processes that are not necessarily more near to the end goal?
Is there some way to like test or be aware of how your nutrition is working? Like, what would you say are the symptoms, or the symptoms sound like a negative word, but like the signs to look out for to tell me that, okay, I'm getting my nutrition on track? Or
I think that's where the quantified self and the lab tests and all that comes in, because even though you might think you're a really good yogi and I feel my body and all that, that's mostly bullshit. Maybe if you're like a Yagetsu, like a Zen monk who's been spending a lot of time mapping this whole system and can feel those things, but at the end of the day, I think the certain symptoms, of course, then you can start to track it down, but then the Western scientific approach is really helpful to break it down and start to understand what's wrong, what's in imbalance, and how that system works. That's why biohacking is kind of a new tool for the newly programmed mind.
It seems like they go hand in hand. Like you can't really do one without the other. It's not all technical and it's not all feeling.
No.
It's a combination.
But it would be really cool if people just felt right away like, well, this is doing this and that, like some people that I've met, but They are rare.
It could also be that it's like a muscle, like the more you use it,
Yeah.
like that's been my personal experience that,
For
okay, you
sure.
have a little thought that maybe this is good or maybe it's not.
Yeah.
But as you start to pay more attention to that, you actually become spot on. And for me now, the tracking, like the testing, is only really reflecting back to me what I already know.
Yeah.
Whereas in the beginning, it was like foreign information for me.
That's
so,
true.
Yeah.
But it's good to remember, like, if you think about this high-level sommeliers who are able to just take a wine and basically tell that it comes from this area, from this year, and like our sensory system has a very cool ability to pick things up. And as you said, if we train these things, we get better at them. It's that simple.
And it's probably true that we were actually born with them. Like children
Yeah.
know that, and we just sort of untrained. So
Yeah.
really, it's just remembering. Like,
True.
Yeah. In our last few seconds, is there a last message you'd like to tell to our viewers around the world about the alchemy of nutrition?
Yeah, I think it's one of my core theses. Often think if there's something you want to change, kind of not to think it in a negative way, in a sense that now I need to avoid this, but the alchemical process of turning shit into the gold is a cool example of like how to think that I have this issue, this challenge. How can I turn it around in a way that feels also good along the way? Not necessarily that it feels during the process, but like, how can I enjoy more of the process? How can I do this with the coolest people I know? And asking those types of questions for the process is very helpful for the alchemy of habit changing, let's say.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.